The morning sun slanted through the tall, arched windows of the modest courthouse, casting golden lines across the polished wooden floor. The hum of conversations, soft shuffling of papers, and occasional coughs filled the air, blending with the faint squeak of shoes against the worn floorboards. The room smelled faintly of polish and old books, a scent that reminded everyone present that justice was being carefully administered, though no one could predict exactly how today would unfold. Judge, a stern but fair man with silver-streaked hair, sat behind the high bench, adjusting his glasses as he perused the file before him. His face was a mask of calm authority, yet even he could sense the unusual tension buzzing in the air. Today's case was serious, a theft that had escalated into violence, leaving the community on edge. The defendant, Bailey, a man in his mid-30s with nervous eyes, fidgeted in his seat. His lawyer whispered words of reassurance, but his hands shook slightly, betraying the anxiety he tried to hide. Amidst this tense environment sat Emma, a little girl of only 3 years old. She wore a soft pink dress, her hair tied in small braids that bobbed with every movement. She clutched her mother's hand tightly, her tiny fingers curling around the warmth of familiarity. To the adults in the room, she was merely a curious child brought along for the morning. To Emma, however, this courtroom was a world of fascinating sounds, shapes, and faces. She tilted her head, her bright blue eyes scanning everything, from the stern judge to the shifting spectators, to the man who seemed nervous and afraid. But it was one presence that drew her attention more than any other: Rex, the police dog. Rex was a majestic German shepherd, muscles coiled under his sleek coat, eyes sharp and intelligent. He sat beside his handler, Officer Daniels, who whispered commands that only Rex seemed to understand. The dog exuded a calm authority, as if he knew exactly why he was there, and as if he alone carried the weight of truth in the courtroom. Emma's eyes followed him intently, her tiny hand twitching toward him occasionally, drawn by the animal's stillness and alertness. She didn't yet understand what Rex did, but she could sense that he was important, different from everyone else in the room. The audience murmured quietly among themselves. Some cast subtle glances at Emma, curious why a child so young was present in such a serious proceeding. Others were more focused on the defendant, whose gaze darted nervously from the jury box to the prosecution table. The air was electric with anticipation, though no one yet knew what would ignite it. The proceedings began with a soft rap of the gavel. Judge's voice rang out, calm and authoritative. "We are here today to hear the case of the state versus Bailey. The defendant is charged with theft and related offenses. Let us proceed with the testimonies." Witnesses were called forward one by one. Each told their story in measured tones, some shaking with nervousness, some speaking with practiced confidence. The defendant attempted to maintain composure, insisting repeatedly on his innocence. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Collins, countered each claim with evidence and pointed questions, painting a picture of a man whose actions had endangered the community. Emma, meanwhile, observed quietly. She was too young to understand the legal jargon or the nuances of guilt and innocence, but she noticed details that adults overlooked. She noticed how his hands trembled when he wasn't speaking, how his eyes darted to Rex, the dog, as if seeking reassurance or perhaps fearing the animal's silent scrutiny. She noticed the faint scent of the leather handcuffs and the subtle shuffling of the officer's boots on the floor. And she noticed Rex, the dog's ears pricked, nostrils twitching, body alert yet controlled. Emma's mother, sensing her daughter's fascination, whispered gently, "Look, honey, the dog is very important. He helps the police find the truth." Emma's eyes widened, absorbing the idea that this animal could know things adults couldn't. She felt a strange kinship with Rex, a sense of understanding that went beyond words. Her small hand twitched again, almost imperceptibly pointing toward him. The courtroom continued its rhythm. Lawyers spoke, witnesses recounted events, and the jury scribbled notes diligently. But all the while, Emma's attention never wavered. She whispered a few words under her breath, inaudible to anyone but herself. There," she murmured, tilting her head toward Rex. Her mother glanced down at her, curious, but said nothing, afraid to disrupt the proceedings. Rex, oblivious to the whispers, remained a picture of discipline, but even his calm was not entirely indifferent. He shifted slightly, tilting his head toward Emma, his dark eyes locking with hers. For a moment, the courtroom seemed to fade away, and it was just the girl and the dog, two observers of a world that was otherwise beyond their understanding. A sudden cough from the back of the courtroom snapped everyone back to reality. Judge cleared his throat and looked over the rim of his glasses. "Order in the court," he said, his voice firm. He noted the child pointing but assumed it was simply a distraction. "We will continue with the witness testimonies," he added, gesturing to the prosecutor. Emma's gaze remained fixed. She tilted her head and whispered again, this time more clearly. "Look, see." She wasn't sure why, but something in her young mind told her that Rex knew something important. She could feel it. The adults were focused on papers, arguments, and evidence, but she and the dog shared a quiet understanding. For the first time, some in the audience noticed the little girl's intensity. The murmurs grew, questioning why a child so young would focus so intently on the dog instead of the proceedings. Officer Daniels shot a subtle glance at the judge, who simply nodded, allowing the demonstration of Rex's tracking abilities to proceed. The room shifted slightly, the air thick with curiosity, tension, and unspoken anticipation. No one knew it yet, but the day's events were about to take an unexpected turn. A 3-year-old's innocent observation, combined with the sharp instincts of a trained police dog, would soon shock everyone in the courtroom. Emma's tiny hand, already twitching toward Rex, would become the center of attention in a way no adult could have predicted. And as she watched, eyes wide and focused, the story of truth, innocence, and revelation quietly began to unfold. The courtroom settled into a heavy silence as the first witness was called. A woman in her 40s, visibly shaken, took the stand. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the podium. I was at the store that night," she began, her voice quivering. "I saw someone taking things that didn't belong to him. He ran quickly after realizing I saw him." Bailey's eyes flicked nervously toward the woman. His mouth opened as if to interrupt, but his lawyer quickly placed a hand on his arm, reminding him to remain silent. Judge watched carefully, his fingers steepled before him, taking mental notes of every nuance. The jury scribbled furiously, their pens scratching across paper as the witness recounted the evening's events. Emma sat on her mother's lap, her small legs swinging slightly, eyes still fixed on Rex. The dog's ears pricked at each voice, his gaze shifting between the witness and the defendant. Emma leaned forward, her tiny fingers curling into a subtle pointing gesture. There," she whispered softly, barely audible. Her mother glanced down, smiling gently, thinking her daughter was mimicking the seriousness of the courtroom. But to Emma, it was not mimicry. She sensed something vital in the tension of the room. The prosecutor, Collins, nodded toward the witness. "Please describe the individual you saw in detail," she asked. The woman swallowed hard and said, "He was wearing dark jeans, a jacket, and he kept looking around like he was afraid of being seen. I can't be sure, but he looked familiar." Shifted uncomfortably, his hands gripped the edge of the defense table and his jaw tightened. The lawyer whispered, "Stay calm. Let's hear her out." The witness continued, recounting how she followed the suspect to the edge of the parking lot before he disappeared into the night. I think he had an accomplice," she added hesitantly. Emma's eyes widened. She felt a flutter in her chest, a strange certainty that Rex, too, understood the tension. The dog lifted his head slightly, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air. Emma's small hand twitched again, pointing firmly toward him. To the adults, it seemed like innocent fascination, but in reality she was responding to subtle cues. Nervous glances at the dog, Rex's alert posture, and the invisible tension that connected them. The second witness, a young man who worked at a nearby gas station, was called. He was nervous, tapping a pen against his knee as he spoke. I remember seeing someone matching the description run toward the alley behind the station," he said. "They were carrying a bag and they looked scared." Eyes flickered toward Rex, and Emma noticed it immediately. Something about the man's gaze made her point even more firmly. "There," she whispered, as if confirming a hidden truth. The courtroom murmurs grew. People began to notice the child pointing at the police dog repeatedly. Some assumed she was simply reacting to his imposing size or presence. Others squinted, trying to make sense of the small hand gestures. The judge observed quietly, his brow furrowed. "Does the child require attention?" a court officer asked. Judge shook his head. "Let her be," he said. "She is not disrupting proceedings." Emma's mother, though slightly nervous, squeezed her daughter's hand. "You're very observant, honey," she whispered. Emma tilted her head, focusing even more intently on Rex. She didn't understand why everyone else seemed so confused. To her, the truth was simple. The dog knew, and the man seemed scared of him. The prosecutor asked the young man to elaborate. "Did you see the suspect's face clearly?" she pressed. The man hesitated. "Not exactly, but I noticed something strange. He seemed cautious, like he knew he was being followed." He nodded subtly toward Rex, though the dog had not moved. Fingers twitched nervously. Emma's eyes narrowed slightly, and her small voice, barely above a whisper, said, "He's scared of him." The courtroom quieted. The murmurs grew again, this time with tension rather than curiosity. Some adults exchanged uneasy glances. Could a child really perceive such subtle behavior? The judge, noticing the strange interaction, leaned slightly forward. "Continue, please," he said, directing his attention back to the witness. A third witness, Officer Daniels, was then called to the stand. He carried a calm presence, exuding authority, and led Rex beside him. The officer explained that Rex was a trained K-9 unit, capable of detecting scents, tracking suspects, and identifying dangerous situations. "This dog is highly disciplined," Officer Daniels said. "He reacts to behaviors humans might overlook." Rex was on the scene near the suspect's last known location and tracked evidence crucial to this case. Emma's gaze sharpened. Her finger pointed decisively at Rex. She whispered, "He knows, he knows." Her mother's eyes widened, realizing that Emma's words might hold more weight than anyone expected. People in the courtroom began to notice the small girl's insistence, her repeated gestures toward the dog. Some chuckled nervously, others exchanged puzzled glances. Shifted in his chair, noticing the tiny hand pointing at Rex. Fear flickered in his eyes. It was subtle but undeniable, and Emma's sharp gaze caught it instantly. "There," she whispered again. The prosecutor paused, noting the child's reaction but unsure how to interpret it. The courtroom seemed to hang in suspended animation, caught between disbelief and anticipation. Witness after witness recounted their experiences, each description adding layers of complexity to the case. Nervous glances at Rex became more pronounced, and each time, Emma's small hand twitched in acknowledgement. By mid-morning, the tension was palpable. Journalists in the back scribbled furiously, some capturing notes, others whispering to colleagues about the unusual dynamic between the child and the dog. The jury sat upright, eyes flicking between the witnesses, and the child, trying to reconcile their observations with the evidence. Even Judge felt a subtle shift in the energy of the courtroom. Something about the interaction between Emma and Rex was quietly changing the atmosphere. It wasn't just a routine case anymore. It had become a story of perception, innocence, and instinct, a collision of human and animal insight that expectations. Emma, unaware of the gravity of her influence, leaned closer to Rex, whispering softly, "He did it." Her words were so quiet that only she and Rex could truly understand the weight behind them. But the room had already begun to feel the undercurrent, a sense that something remarkable was unfolding. Adults whispered, pens paused mid-note, and even the seasoned officer glanced down at the child with curiosity. The morning's testimonies continued, but every statement, every piece of evidence, now seemed filtered through the lens of Emma's observations. Though she was just 3 years old, she had begun to perceive patterns, connections, and truths that adults, despite their experience and training, had overlooked. And as the court took a short recess, All eyes were quietly drawn to the small girl and the imposing police dog beside her, a duo whose innocent interaction had already begun to reshape the day. The courtroom was silent, but an undercurrent of tension had begun to pulse through the room. Emma's tiny hand had been pointing at Rex repeatedly, subtle at first, then more deliberate with every witness. No one had paid much attention initially. After all, she was just a child. But the more adults observed, the harder it was to ignore her intensity. The whispers had begun to ripple through the gallery, growing louder as curiosity restrained. Judge, adjusting his glasses, leaned forward slightly. "Officer Daniels, please remain at your post," he said, his eyes flicking toward the K-9 unit. "And is there any particular reason the child is pointing at the dog?" His voice was calm, measured, but curiosity crept into the tone, betraying the slight surprise even a seasoned judge could not mask. Officer Daniels gave a polite nod. "Your Honor, Emma is simply observing Rex as many children do. The dog is calm, disciplined, and trained to remain focused in high-stress environments. He does not respond impulsively. I assure the court she is not interfering." Emma's mother squeezed her daughter's shoulder gently, trying to keep her quiet. "Honey, just watch," she whispered softly. But Emma's eyes were locked on Rex, her little body leaning forward in anticipation. Her lips quivered as if she had something very important to say, and in her own mind she did. The defendant, Bailey, noticed the small girl pointing. His eyes flicked repeatedly toward Rex, a subtle but undeniable fear reflected in his expression. He shifted in his seat, fingers gripping the edges of the table, trying to mask the anxiety that had been building all morning. Every instinct in screamed that the child had noticed something he hadn't counted on. The gallery murmured, curious and uneasy. "Why is she pointing at the dog?" someone whispered from the back. Another voice responded, "I think she knows something, but what could a 3-year-old know?" Even the seasoned attorneys exchanged brief, uncertain glances. Something about Emma's focus was unusual, almost alarming in its precision. Then Emma spoke. Her voice was small but clear, slicing through the low murmurs like a soft bell. "He did it." The courtroom froze instantly. Gasping, a few people leaned forward in disbelief. The judge's eyebrows shot upward, the gavel nearly falling from his hand. Bailey paled, his lips parting in shock. The jury members exchanged startled glances. The air was electric, charged with a tension that seemed almost tangible. No one had expected the words of a 3-year-old to punctuate the proceedings so dramatically. Rex, sitting calmly beside Officer Daniels, tilted his head as if acknowledging the statement. There was no bark, no sudden movement, yet his posture communicated attentiveness, an unspoken understanding that drew the room's attention further. Emma's mother gently pressed a hand over her daughter's mouth, partly to stifle the words, partly in awe of the clarity and certainty in her little girl's tone. Judge took a slow breath, regaining composure. "Excuse me," he said, his voice firm but measured. "Did the child just speak?" "She did, Your Honor," the mother admitted quietly, her voice betraying a mixture of concern and pride. She noticed something about the dog." "Noticed something about the dog," muttered the prosecutor, Collins, her brow furrowed. She leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. "Officer Daniels, can the dog respond in any way to such cues? Could the child's observation mean something relevant?" Officer Daniels nodded carefully. "Rex is trained to detect stress, fear, and human behavioral changes in a variety of situations. While a child's pointing might seem coincidental, the fact that Emma is focusing on Rex at this exact moment could be insightful. Sometimes even the smallest observers notice patterns adults overlook." The gallery leaned closer. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing the rare moment when innocence and trained instinct collided in a courtroom. Shifted again, his anxiety growing. Each flicker of his gaze toward Rex seemed amplified by Emma's unwavering attention. The child's words, innocent yet accurate, had begun to pierce the layers of deception the defendant had hoped to maintain. The judge called for a pause. "We will recess briefly," he announced, tapping his gavel. "Let us allow the child to be observed without interruption." During the recess, whispers spread quickly. "Did she just accuse him?" someone asked in hushed tones. "She's 3 years old, how could she possibly know?" Another voice muttered, "It's the dog knows." Emma's mother knelt beside her, brushing a stray braid from the girl's forehead. "Honey, it's okay," she said softly. "You don't have to say anything more." Emma looked up, eyes wide and serious. "He's scared," she whispered, voice barely audible. Her mother's heart skipped a beat. "Who's scared, honey?" Bailey, sitting nearby, felt a chill crawl up his spine, though he didn't fully understand why. The words of a child, innocent and pure, had revealed something he could not hide. His lawyer whispered urgently, "Ignore it. She's just a child. Don't let it distract you." But the fear in his eyes was no longer a secret. When the court reconvened, the energy in the room had shifted. Jurors, spectators, and even the attorneys were subtly attentive to the interplay between Emma and Rex. The child's earlier gestures now carried weight. Her observations, so casual in appearance, were starting to frame the case in a new, unanticipated light. Collins, the prosecutor, leaned toward the judge. "Your Honor, may we inquire whether Rex's behavior can be demonstrated before the jury?" The dog's reactions, in combination with the child's observations, could be highly relevant. Judge nodded slowly. "Proceed, but ensure the child's safety and comfort. Officer Daniels, you will remain by the dog at all times." Emma's small fingers curled into a fist, her gaze never leaving Rex. She whispered again, almost to herself, "See, he knows." Her voice, though soft, carried an eerie certainty. The courtroom, aware now of the quiet drama unfolding, watched every small motion, the twitch of a finger, the tilt of a dog's head, the subtle movements of a nervous adult. As Officer Daniels began to demonstrate Rex's training, Emma leaned forward slightly, tilting her head and murmuring soft words under her breath. The courtroom, still tense, felt as if it were holding its collective breath. Every adult seemed to sense that they were on the verge of witnessing something extraordinary, a moment where innocence, instinct, and justice might collide in a way that no one could have predicted. Emma's words, so simple, were shaping the perception of every witness and juror. The tension between the child, the dog, and the defendant had become the invisible thread that connected every action in the room. And as the demonstration began, all eyes were quietly, unknowingly waiting for the moment when truth would reveal itself in the most unexpected of ways. By the time the demonstration was fully, the subtle magic of the courtroom had taken hold. The murmur of whispers had transformed into hushed awe. Every movement of Rex, every flicker of Emma's gaze, every nervous twitch of Bailey seemed amplified. It was as if the entire courtroom had shifted into a new dimension, one where innocence and trained instinct were beginning to unravel the threads of deception. And though no one knew it yet, the events that had started with a small child pointing at a dog would soon culminate in a revelation so shocking that it would be remembered by everyone present for the rest of their lives. The courtroom had settled into an almost surreal hush. Every adult present could feel the quiet tension, like the air itself had thickened. Emma's tiny hand, which had been twitching and pointing at Rex throughout the morning, now rested lightly on her mother's arm. Her blue eyes were wide, intent, and strangely serious for a child of 3. Something inside her, innate, instinctive, and almost impossibly precise, was urging her to speak. All attention, whether acknowledged or not, had slowly shifted toward her. Even Bailey, who had attempted to focus on his lawyer's whispered reassurances, could not help but notice. His eyes flicked repeatedly toward the child, fear creeping into his expression. He adjusted in his seat, fingertips pressing into the table as if gripping it could somehow protect him from what was coming. Judge cleared his throat, leaning forward slightly. "Is there something the child wishes to say?" he asked, curious but careful not to interfere. His voice carried authority, yet there was an unmistakable hint of wonder. In all his years on the bench, He had never seen a courtroom so captivated by a single 3-year-old. Emma's lips trembled for a moment, but then she drew a deep breath, steady and clear. "He did it," she said, her small voice ringing louder than anyone expected. The effect was instantaneous. The courtroom froze. Gasps echoed in the gallery, some sharp, some muted, as people instinctively leaned forward, straining to hear what they had just heard. Bailey's face went pale, his jaw fell slightly, eyes wide with a mixture of shock and panic. Even seasoned courtroom staff froze, pens poised mid-scribble, not wanting to miss the unfolding moment. Rex, sitting beside Officer Daniels, tilted his head slightly. His dark eyes locked onto, calm yet piercing, as though the dog had confirmed what Emma had just spoken. No bark, no growl, just a steady, unwavering presence that seemed to underscore the child's declaration. Murmurs spread through the gallery. "Did she just?" one spectator whispered, voice trembling. "A 3-year-old just accused him." "She's just a child," another voice protested. "How could she possibly know anything?" Judge raised a hand to restore order, though even he seemed momentarily unprepared for the gravity of what had occurred. "Order in the court," he said firmly, tapping the gavel. "Please, everyone, remain calm." Bailey's lawyer leaned in close, whispering urgently. "Ignore her," he said. "She's a child. Her words hold no legal weight. Don't let this distract you." But the seed of doubt had been planted. Even the prosecutor, Collins, paused. She leaned forward in her chair, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Could this child, with no knowledge of legal proceedings, have noticed something that adults had overlooked? Could her innocent observation be connected to the evidence they had painstakingly gathered? Officer Daniels cleared his throat, speaking carefully. "Your Honor, while children cannot serve as witnesses in the traditional sense, this is not entirely without significance. Rex, as a trained K-9 unit, is sensitive to stress and behavioral cues. The child's attention to him, combined with her observation, could indicate she has noticed something adults might have missed. While we cannot rely solely on her words, they do warrant consideration." The gallery was silent again, now with a different kind of tension. The initial shock had given way to a creeping sense of unease. Everyone was beginning to realize that something extraordinary was happening, a collision of innocence, instinct, and truth that no one could have anticipated. Bailey's eyes flicked nervously from Rex to Emma. A bead of sweat ran down his temple. He swallowed hard, trying to force his composure, but his movements betrayed him. The subtle twitch of his fingers, the slight tremor in his hands, and the way his gaze avoided direct eye contact with the child were small but unmistakable signs of fear. Emma's mother, sensing the rising tension, whispered softly, "Honey, that's enough." She pressed a hand gently on Emma's shoulder, unsure of how to navigate the surreal moment. But Emma, with the clarity and innocence only a 3-year-old could possess, did not withdraw. Her gaze remained fixed, her tiny face serious and intent, as if she understood exactly what she had just done. The jury shifted uncomfortably. They were trained to focus on evidence, testimony, and procedure, yet the courtroom had become something else entirely. A child's voice had pierced the formal structure of the law and disrupted the careful balance of reason and proof. Each juror glanced at the others, questioning whether a child's observation, amplified by a trained dog's behavior, might indeed be a vital piece of the puzzle. Judge cleared his throat again, regaining composure. "We will continue with the examination," he said carefully. "But the court acknowledges the child's statement. Officer Daniels, please proceed with the demonstration and ensure the child's comfort at all times." Officer Daniels nodded, signaling Rex to stand. The dog rose gracefully, muscles rippling under his sleek coat. Emma's eyes lit up with fascination, her tiny hands twitching again toward him. "See," she whispered. "He knows." Bailey's face was ashen now, a flicker of panic crossing his features. Every time Rex moved, every subtle shift in posture seemed by the child's unwavering attention. Could feel the walls closing in, as though the innocence and instinct in the room had combined to illuminate a truth he had desperately tried to hide. The gallery leaned forward collectively, sensing the extraordinary moment unfolding. Journalists scribbled furiously, capturing the surreal interplay of events. A 3-year-old child pointing at a police dog, the defendant's subtle fear, and the silent yet commanding presence of Rex. The tension was nearly unbearable, as if the entire room were waiting for a single revelation to tip the balance of justice. Emma whispered again, louder this time, "He's scared." The courtroom erupted, not in chaos but in quiet astonishment. Everyone noticed the truth in her simple observation. His hand twitched involuntarily. His lawyer looked like he had just been punched. Even the judge felt a rare shiver of awe at the clarity of a child's perception. Collins, the prosecutor, leaned forward, curiosity and calculation in her eyes. "Your Honor," she said softly, "while this child cannot testify formally, her observation aligns with critical elements of the case. I request we consider the context of Rex's behavior and the defendant's reactions alongside the established evidence." Judge nodded slowly, adjusting his glasses. "Noted. Let us proceed, and may the truth continue to reveal itself." Emma, unaware of the weight her words carried, beamed slightly, satisfied that she had done what she needed to do. Rex nudged her gently with his nose, as if affirming her understanding. For a fleeting moment the courtroom felt smaller, almost intimate, 2 observers, a child and a dog, quietly highlighting what no adult had noticed. Bailey, meanwhile, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He could no longer hide his fear. Even his lawyer's reassurances had lost effect. The interplay of innocence and instinct had begun to unravel the threads he had so carefully woven around his guilt. Every subtle movement, every glance, every tiny gesture was now. The gallery, the jury, and the court staff were all silently aware. Something remarkable had happened. The smallest voice in the room had spoken, and it had shaken the courtroom to its core. The rest of the trial, everyone sensed, would never be the same. And though no one knew it yet, Emma's simple declaration "he did it" would soon connect to evidence and testimony in ways that would leave the courtroom, and the community, astounded. What began as a child's innocent observation was about to catalyze a chain of revelation that no adult could have foreseen. The morning had started like any other courtroom session. By midday, the proceedings had transformed into a dramatic, almost cinematic moment of truth, sparked by a 3-year-old girl and a police dog whose loyalty and training could not be ignored. Every eye in the courtroom, every nerve, every whispered thought, now fixated on the delicate but undeniable bond between innocence and instinct, knowing that it would alter the course of justice in ways none could have imagined. The courtroom had fallen into a tense, almost surreal silence. The echoes of Emma's "did it" still hung in the air like a whispered secret that everyone was suddenly aware of. Even after the brief recess, the energy from that moment had not dissipated. Spectators leaned forward in their seats, jurors exchanged glances filled with curiosity and uncertainty, and reporters whispered furiously among themselves. Somehow, the smallest observer in the room had upended the rhythm of the trial. Officer Daniels stepped forward, his hand resting lightly on Rex's collar. The dog's eyes glimmered with alertness, and his ears pricked up as if he sensed the heightened anticipation in the room. Bailey shifted uneasily in his seat, his fingers twitching on the table. The subtle tremor in his movements betrayed his inner fear. Each time Rex moved slightly or turned his head, flinched, and Emma's eyes followed these motions with unerring focus. Judge raised a hand to restore order. "We will now proceed with further evidence presentation. Officer Daniels, please explain the circumstances of Rex's tracking at the scene." The officer's voice was calm and steady, authoritative yet measured. Rex was deployed near the location of the alleged theft on the evening of March 12th. He was tasked with locating and following the suspect's scent trail. In previous instances, Rex has accurately identified individuals involved in criminal activity through behavioral and olfactory cues. He paused, letting the courtroom absorb the gravity of his words. Emma's mother gently adjusted her daughter on her lap, whispering softly, "Remember, honey, just watch. You're very brave." Emma's tiny fingers twitched slightly as her gaze remained fixed on Rex, who now seemed more animated than before. It was as if the dog understood the importance of the moment and was communicating silently with the child. Officer Daniels continued. On that evening, Rex tracked the suspect, Mr. Bailey, to a location near the alley behind the gas station, where witnesses reported seeing suspicious activity. Rex's behavior during the tracking was consistent with prior instances of suspect identification. Alert posture, tail slightly raised, ears forward, and subtle movements indicating recognition of the individual. In this case, the suspect attempted to divert Rex's attention, but the dog remained focused. His hands trembled more noticeably. His lawyer leaned in, whispering reassurance, but even he could not hide the tension. Every adult in the courtroom seemed to feel the weight of Rex's presence, amplified by Emma's attentive eyes. The child's focus and subtle gestures suddenly took on an almost prophetic significance. The prosecutor, Collins, interjected thoughtfully, "Officer Daniels, can you confirm whether the suspect's behavior during tracking indicated awareness of Rex's detection?" The officer nodded. Yes. The individual displayed signs of nervousness and attempted to evade the dog's line of sight. This behavior aligns with actions observed in previous cases where Rex has successfully identified suspects. The dog's cues were instrumental in guiding law enforcement to corroborating evidence, including the bag and items recovered at the scene. Emma's small hand twitched again. "See," she whispered softly, almost to herself. "He's scared." Her words, though quiet, resonated in a way the adults could feel, though they could not yet fully interpret. The gallery leaned forward, fascinated by the interplay between child and dog. The jurors scribbled notes, unsure how to incorporate what seemed like an impossible human-animal collaboration into their deliberations. Bailey's eyes flicked repeatedly between Rex and Emma. The fear that had been growing all morning now settled heavily over his features. Every subtle movement of the dog, every tiny gesture of the child, seemed to confirm a reality he could no longer hide. He attempted to speak, but his voice faltered. This is irrelevant," he stammered, glancing at his lawyer for support. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Relevance is determined by evidence and procedure," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for interruption. "Officer Daniels, please continue." Rex shifted slightly, sniffing the air as if to punctuate the officer's words. Emma's eyes followed his every motion, her gaze intense and unwavering. She whispered again, almost inaudibly, "There, he's guilty." Her small voice was soft, yet the certainty in it was unmistakable. The room felt a subtle, almost imperceptible vibration of awareness, as if everyone collectively sensed that her observation carried weight beyond her years. Officer Daniels continued with the demonstration. The suspect's scent trail was confirmed by Rex in conjunction with security camera footage and witness testimony. The dog's trained detection was crucial in connecting Mr. Bailey to the location of the theft. This evidence, combined with additional corroboration, supports the conclusion that the suspect was present at the scene during the time of the alleged crime. Emma's mother glanced down at her daughter, unsure whether to interrupt. But Emma, with her head tilted slightly and her eyes fixed on Rex, remained calm and focused. It was clear that the child's attention was guiding, in some mysterious way, the perception of the adults in the room. Every subtle movement of her hands, every whispered word, seemed to underscore the unfolding narrative of truth. The prosecutor leaned forward again, her voice precise. "Your Honor, may we submit Rex's tracking report and video footage into evidence? The correlation between the dog's behavior and the child's observation provides a compelling, though unusual, perspective on the events in question." Judge nodded. "Proceed. Let the record reflect the child's observations as context, not formal testimony, but acknowledge that her perception may be indicative of actual events." As the evidence was presented, the room collectively held its breath. The security footage showed moving nervously near the alley, clutching a bag, glancing around as though anticipating someone or something tracking him. Every subtle detail aligned perfectly with Rex's movements, and surprisingly to everyone with Emma's quiet, focused attention. His face drained of color. His hands trembled uncontrollably, and even his lawyer's whispered reassurances seemed insufficient. The interplay between the evidence, the dog's trained instincts, and the child's observations had formed a narrative that was almost impossible to dispute. Journalists scribbled furiously, capturing every moment, every facial expression. The jury leaned forward, riveted by the unlikely collaboration of a child and a police dog guiding the perception of events. Witnesses whispered among themselves, trying to reconcile what they had seen with the new lens through which the courtroom was now interpreting reality. Emma leaned forward slightly, whispering again, "He can't hide." Her words, innocent yet precise, resonated with everyone present. It was as if the child, without understanding the full implications of the law, had highlighted the truth in a way no adult had managed. The courtroom had transformed from a scene of procedure and argument into a stage where innocence and instinct were dictating the perception of guilt. Even the gallery felt it, the subtle, unspoken acknowledgement that something extraordinary was unfolding. Bailey, once confident enough to sit quietly, now shifted in his seat, unable to maintain composure. His attempts to mask fear were transparent to everyone, especially the jury, who scribbled notes with a mix of astonishment and disbelief. Judge leaned back slightly, his expression grave but thoughtful. The court recognizes the unusual circumstances of this case. While we proceed with formal evidence and testimony, the observations made, though unconventional, will be considered in the context of the totality of evidence. Emma, oblivious to the gravity of her impact, smiled faintly. Rex nudged her gently, his head tilting toward her as if affirming her understanding. A quiet bond had formed between them, invisible to most but potent in its effect. Together, they had highlighted subtle truths that no adult had perceived. By the time recess was called, the courtroom had transformed completely. What had begun as a routine theft trial had evolved into a tense, almost cinematic drama of perception, instinct, and innocence. Everyone present had become acutely aware that the combination of Emma's observation and Rex's training had begun to shape the understanding of truth in the case. The gallery murmured quietly, reflecting on the extraordinary sequence of events. Bailey sat slumped, pale and anxious, realizing that the walls of deception he had tried to erect were beginning to crumble. And in a quiet corner, a 3-year-old girl and a loyal police dog had, without intention, altered the course of a courtroom proceeding. It was clear to everyone. The events unfolding were more than unusual. They were remarkable. And the next steps of the trial would only deepen the impact of their extraordinary collaboration. The courtroom was thick with tension as the next phase of the trial began. All eyes were on Bailey, who now sat rigidly in his chair, beads of sweat forming along his forehead. His previously controlled composure had crumbled, replaced with a subtle panic that was impossible to conceal. Every glance he cast toward the jury, the judge, or the small figure of Emma on her mother's lap was heavy with fear. Officer Daniels stood beside Rex, his posture calm and deliberate. The dog's black eyes were sharp, scanning the room with precision. Every muscle in his body reflected focus and discipline, a silent affirmation of the truth that he had been trained to detect. Emma, meanwhile, sat with wide eyes, her tiny hand pointing ever so slightly toward Rex. She did not yet understand fully why the adults around her seemed so nervous, but she sensed something important had shifted. Judge tapped the gavel lightly, restoring order. We will now examine the collected evidence and its alignment with witness testimony, surveillance footage, and Rex's tracking report. Officer Daniels, please summarize the findings. The officer cleared his throat. Your Honor, during the course of the investigation, Rex successfully tracked Mr. Bailey from the scene of the alleged theft to a nearby alley. Surveillance cameras in the vicinity captured footage of an individual matching his description, moving quickly with a bag consistent with stolen items. Witness statements, including the testimony of Ms. at the store and the gas station attendant, corroborate Rex's tracking. Together, the evidence establishes a strong connection between Mr. Bailey and the scene of the crime. Bailey's hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the table. His lawyer whispered urgently, but even the practiced reassurances seemed hollow against the combined weight of canine tracking, video footage, and witness testimony. The subtle twitch in his fingers betrayed a fear that words could no longer conceal. Emma leaned forward slightly, whispering under her breath, "See, he can't hide." Her words, innocent and soft, carried a strange clarity, almost as if she were narrating a story that adults were only beginning to comprehend. Her mother, sensing the tension, held her closer, but allowed her daughter's gaze to remain fixed on Rex. The prosecutor, Collins, addressed the court, her voice firm and precise. "Your Honor, the combination of Rex's trained observation and the corroborating evidence from surveillance and witnesses leaves little doubt. While the child's words are unconventional, they align with the documented evidence and provide an additional perspective on the defendant's behavior. The court can see that the suspect's nervousness around Rex, observed by Emma, is consistent with his attempts to avoid detection." A murmur ran through the gallery. Spectators exchanged glances, some in disbelief, others in fascination. The idea that a 3-year-old child could observe cues that adults had missed was extraordinary. His face paled further, his eyes darting between Rex and Emma. The subtle fear that had begun in Part 5 now had become undeniable. Judge leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "It appears that the evidence presented today, combined with observations of behavior, both human and canine, corroborates key aspects of the prosecution's case. While the child's statements are not formal testimony, they have highlighted behavior consistent with established facts. This court acknowledges the significance of this unique alignment of evidence, observation, and instinct." Emma's small hand twitched again, pointing slightly upward, as if reinforcing her earlier declaration. "He did it," she whispered again, her voice steady. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. This time her words were no longer just an innocent remark. They were a bridge connecting instinct and fact, child and dog, perception and truth. Rex shifted subtly, moving his head toward. The dog's presence was commanding, calm yet authoritative, leaving no room for evasion. His breathing grew shallow. His lawyer whispered once more, but the words were swallowed by the magnitude of what was unfolding. The subtle, silent communication between Emma and Rex had become a force no adult could ignore. Collins continued, presenting additional evidence to the jury. Security footage showed nervous glances, the slight hesitation in his stride, the repeated checking over his shoulder, all behaviors consistent with someone aware of being tracked. Each piece of evidence aligned seamlessly with the story Rex had traced and the child had noticed. The courtroom was quiet, the gravity of the moment settling over everyone like a heavy cloak. Emma's mother whispered softly, "You're very brave, honey." Emma's eyes sparkled faintly, her lips curving in a small, knowing smile. She did not yet understand the legal significance of what she had observed, but she knew she had seen something adults had overlooked. Rex, sensing her satisfaction, nudged her hand gently with his nose. Bailey's face betrayed more than words ever could. His jaw tightened, eyes wide with an undeniable realization. He could no longer deny the mounting evidence. Every instinct, every trained behavior of Rex, and every subtle observation of a child had converged into a narrative he could not escape. The jury members exchanged glances, their pens stilling as they absorbed the culmination of the evidence and the unusual, yet undeniable, alignment between canine tracking and a child's observation. The gallery leaned forward, captivated by the unprecedented spectacle, a courtroom transformed into a stage where innocence and instinct intersected with legal proceedings. Judge spoke again, his voice steady but filled with gravitas. The court recognizes the extraordinary circumstances present in this case. While we proceed according to standard legal protocol, the alignment of evidence with observed behavior, both human and animal, has been noted. The weight of this evidence will be considered in conjunction with all other testimonies. Rex sat quietly, obedient yet alert, his gaze fixed on. The dog's discipline and training were apparent to everyone, and yet it was Emma's interpretation of subtle cues that had allowed the courtroom to perceive what Rex had silently communicated. A tiny girl and a dog, without understanding the intricacies of the law, had together illuminated a truth that adults had struggled to piece together. The lawyer whispered urgently once more, but the attempt to control the narrative was futile. The alignment of behavior, evidence, and observation had created an unshakable reality. Shifted in his seat, the tension radiating visibly from him. The courtroom, though silent, could almost feel the ripple of unease and realization emanating from him. The gallery watched in awe as the final pieces of evidence were laid before the court. The stolen items, recovered near the alley Rex had tracked, aligned perfectly with the surveillance footage and witness accounts. The puzzle was complete. Every element, canine tracking, child observation, video, and testimony, formed an intricate web that led unerringly to one conclusion. Emma's eyes remained wide and focused, her small hand resting lightly on Rex. She whispered once more, "He can't hide," as if narrating the invisible threads connecting the evidence. The courtroom collectively shivered in acknowledgement of the extraordinary moment. Judge finally leaned back, taking a deep breath. It is rare that a court witnesses such a convergence of evidence, observation, and instinct. The court recognizes the weight of this alignment and will proceed accordingly in considering all evidence presented. Bailey's face had drained completely of color. His lawyer placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, but could feel the reality closing in. The carefully constructed narrative he had attempted to maintain had crumbled under the weight of truth, as revealed by a 3-year-old child and a police dog trained to perceive subtle cues. The gallery erupted in whispered astonishment. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing the remarkable story that had unfolded. A child's innocence paired with a dog's instincts had unveiled the truth in a way no one had anticipated. Witnesses shook their heads in disbelief, while jurors leaned forward, trying to reconcile the extraordinary circumstances with the evidence they were tasked to evaluate. Emma leaned slightly against her mother, her eyes still fixed on Rex. She smiled faintly, unaware of the gravity of what she had just accomplished. To her, it had been a simple act of noticing, but to everyone else, it had become a defining moment, a revelation that would be remembered long after the case concluded. Rex nudged her hand gently, as if acknowledging her contribution. The subtle, silent bond between child and dog had catalyzed a truth that no human effort alone could have fully revealed. In that courtroom, on that remarkable day, innocence, instinct, and justice had collided in a way no one could have foreseen. And in the minds of everyone present, the extraordinary reality had settled. A 3-year-old child and a loyal police dog had together illuminated a truth so precise and undeniable that it would leave an indelible mark on the proceedings, and on the hearts of all who witnessed it. The courtroom had never been quieter. Even the low hum of whispered conversations had subsided, replaced by a heavy stillness. Every eye was on Bailey, whose face had drained of all color. The subtle tremor in his hands, the shallow breaths, and the shifting weight in his chair betrayed his awareness that the truth, now undeniable, had caught up to him. The previously tense room had transformed into one of quiet astonishment, the weight of Emma's words and Rex's presence settling over everyone like a gentle but undeniable force. Judge, his expression stern yet tinged with wonder, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. The court has considered all testimony, evidence, and observations presented. While the child's statements are not formal testimony, the alignment of her observations with Rex's trained detection, witness accounts, and video evidence has highlighted a critical element in this case. It is clear that the defendant was present at the scene and engaged in the criminal activity as alleged. Bailey's eyes widened in disbelief. His lawyer whispered urgently, trying to stall, but the judge raised a hand, silencing him. The court finds the defendant's attempts to evade detection, combined with corroborating evidence, compelling. Bailey, the court holds you responsible for the charges brought against you. This ruling will reflect the totality of evidence and testimony. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Spectators exchanged glances of disbelief, awe, and relief. For a moment, it was hard to believe that the case had reached its conclusion in such an extraordinary manner. A 3-year-old child and a police dog, two unlikely participants, had played pivotal roles in revealing the truth. Emma's mother glanced down at her daughter, her heart swelling with pride. "Honey," she whispered, "you were so brave." Emma, still clutching her mother's hand, looked up at Rex, her small face lighting up with joy. The dog gave a subtle wag of his tail and a gentle nudge with his nose, acknowledging the bond they had shared throughout the trial. The prosecutor, Collins, allowed herself a small smile. "Extraordinary," she murmured to the court reporter beside her. "I've never seen anything like this." The jury members nodded in quiet agreement, recognizing that the events of the morning had been nothing short of remarkable. Bailey slumped in his chair, defeated. The carefully constructed defenses, the lies, and the attempts to obscure the truth had all crumbled under the combined power of evidence, instinct, and observation. He could not ignore the subtle interplay between the child and the dog, the small, decisive gestures that had revealed his guilt far more effectively than words or testimony alone ever could. As the court proceedings concluded, Judge allowed a brief moment of reflection. "Let this case serve as a reminder that truth often reveals itself in unexpected ways," he said. "Even the smallest observer, paired with careful attention and instinct, can illuminate what adults may overlook." The gallery erupted in quiet applause, the kind that acknowledges not only justice served, but the extraordinary circumstances under which it had been revealed. Spectators leaned over to whisper among themselves, recounting how Emma's innocent observation had intersected with Rex's trained instincts to uncover the truth. Reporters scribbled furiously, eager to capture the story that was already becoming legend. A courtroom transformed by the unlikely collaboration of a child and a dog. Outside the courtroom, the press waited, cameras flashing as news crews scrambled to capture the moment. Bailey was led away in handcuffs, a defeated figure whose attempts to evade responsibility had failed. Witnesses offered quiet congratulations to Officer Daniels, acknowledging Rex's role in the case. And through it all, Emma and her mother remained calm, holding hands as they watched the events unfold. A reporter approached them cautiously, notebook in hand. "Miss Emma," she began, "can you tell us what you saw today?" Emma looked up at Rex, her eyes wide and earnest, and whispered softly, "He knew. I knew." The reporter paused, struck by the simplicity and clarity of the statement. She scribbled furiously, understanding that these words captured the essence of the entire trial. The extraordinary perception of a child and the disciplined instincts of a dog had revealed a truth no adult alone could have discerned. Officer Daniels knelt beside Emma and gave her a gentle smile. "You were amazing today," he said softly. "Rex and I couldn't have done it without your eyes." Emma's face lit up with pride. She reached out tentatively, and Rex leaned in, allowing her to stroke his sleek fur. The dog's warm, steady presence seemed to reinforce the lesson Emma had intuitively understood all along. Courage, observation, and honesty could illuminate even the darkest truths. Emma's mother embraced her daughter tightly. "You did something incredible today," she whispered. "You helped reveal the truth." Emma smiled faintly, her attention still on Rex. "He helped me," she said simply. "We helped each other." The courthouse gradually emptied, but the story had already begun to ripple outward. News articles would describe the unusual but undeniable alliance between child and dog. Social media would buzz with wonder and admiration. People across the country would marvel at the idea that a 3-year-old's observation and the instincts of a police dog had contributed so directly to justice being served. Inside the courthouse, the bond between Emma and Rex remained quiet but palpable. They had shared a unique understanding, a subtle, unspoken communication that transcended words. Adults might not fully grasp it, but they had witnessed its effects. Truth revealed, justice served, and a courtroom forever changed. Judge lingered in his chambers after the proceedings, reflecting on the extraordinary events. In all his years, he had presided over countless cases, but never one where innocence and instinct had so directly revealed the truth. He smiled faintly, acknowledging that sometimes justice is illuminated not only by evidence and testimony, but by observation, empathy, and the quiet courage of the unexpected. As Emma and her mother left the courthouse, they paused on the steps, looking back at the building that had been the stage for such an extraordinary day. The sun had shifted slightly in the sky, casting a warm glow over the stone facade. Emma's small hand rested lightly on Rex's collar, and the dog nudged her gently, as if sharing in the satisfaction of a job well done. "Will we see him again?" Emma asked softly, her voice full of genuine curiosity and admiration. Officer Daniels smiled. "Of course," he said. "Rex will always be ready to help, especially if you're around to notice the details." Emma beamed, her small heart swelling with pride and wonder. Together, they had proven something remarkable. Even the smallest observers can have a profound impact, and the bond between humans and animals can reveal truths beyond what logic alone can uncover. As the crowd dispersed and the courthouse quieted, the story lingered in the minds of all who had witnessed it. The tale of a 3-year-old girl pointing at a police dog and speaking 2 simple words, words that would shock a courtroom, unmask a criminal, and capture the hearts of many, would be retold for years to come. It was a story not only of justice, but of wonder, innocence, and the extraordinary ways in which truth can emerge when we pay attention to the world around us. For Emma, it was simply another day. She had observed, she had spoken, and she had noticed something adults could not. For Rex, it was another demonstration of loyalty and skill, tempered by an almost magical connection with a small human companion. But for everyone else, it was a reminder that justice, wonder, and even awe can sometimes come from the most unexpected places. A 3-year-old child and a police dog, standing together at the center of a courtroom, revealing a truth that no one could deny. And so, as the sun set behind the courthouse, casting long shadows over the steps, the story concluded, not with a roar but with a quiet, undeniable truth. Courage, observation, and a touch of innocence can change everything. Emma looked up at Rex, smiled, and whispered, "We did it." Rex nudged her hand gently in reply, a silent affirmation that sometimes the most extraordinary moments are those shared between the smallest observer and the most loyal friend. The courtroom drama had ended, the criminal was held accountable, and a nation would soon marvel at the tale of a child, a dog, and the subtle but undeniable power of truth.